Oh, test. Now it's on. It's on. All right. Okay, so we're in Daniel chapter 2. I think we got to verse 6, but I'm going to just back up and start at 4. It's kind of where the thought starts. So just to kind of recap briefly what's going on. So Nebuchadnezzar has become king of Babylon. He has captured or taken over several kingdoms in what would be west of him, like Judah, Aram, or what you might call Syria, parts of Egypt and so forth. And so he's taken a bunch of these young noble kids, royal kids, back to Babylon. And he's put them into a school where they train for about 3 years, and they learn a lot of different things. And once they graduate, they go into the king's administration and various different types of roles. And so as you start chapter 2, what you learn is that Nebuchadnezzar has some kind of dream, and it causes him a lot of distress. And so he calls there's about 4 different terms for these people, but basically the gist of it, they're the guys who deal with dream interpretation, astrology, all that kind of stuff. And he calls them in to try to interpret the dream. And that's kind of where we left off last week. Now, this is very early in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It says in chapter 2, verse 1, that this is the 2nd year of his reign. The way they count years is a little different than us. Year 1 is technically year 0 for them. But the years are also a little unusual. So like using our calendar, if you took over and became king on December 31st, that is the 1st year. January 1st becomes the 2nd year. So you could be king for 2 days, but get credit for 2 years, essentially. But year 1 is really year 0. They call that the ascension year. So then year 1 is what we would call year 2. Year 2 is what we call year 3. So when it says it's his 2nd year, by the way we count it, it's really his 3rd year. But depending on when he became king and when this is happening, even though it's the 3rd year, it could be as little as 13 months into his reign. So the timing of it's a little kind of hard to say exactly how long he's been king, but relatively a short time. So he's pretty early in his reign. So if we pick up in verse 4, it says, then the Chaldeans spoke to, or actually let me back up to verse 3. So the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Verse 4, the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever, tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. So what it seems like is happening so far, and it'll become a little more clear as we get into it, at this point, Daniel and his friends have graduated from school, and they fall into this, they have been appointed into this category of people where they're in with the astrologers or the dream interpreters and that kind of group of people. That's the role that they're going to be playing in Nebuchadnezzar's administration. But it doesn't seem that they have been called to this meeting. So it sounds like what he is doing is he's calling his more experienced guys that do this kind of work, or maybe he's only calling the ones that are actually born in Babylon. So it doesn't look like Daniel and the other 3 are part of the initial wave of people he's talking to here. Even though they have graduated, and what we'll see in a minute, they will suffer the same punishment that these guys will suffer if the dream doesn't get interpreted. Okay, so he says he wants to know the interpretation of the dream, and these guys say, sure, tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. So verse 5, it says, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm if you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. And I think that's where we left off last week, but I'll go ahead and read the next verse, and then we'll talk about it. So it says, however, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. So we'll kind of work a little bit backwards here. So as far as the type of gifts that they would get, it doesn't say exactly, but typical things that they would get back then, it would be like a promotion, or you might even go as high as offering. He may have offered one of his daughters as in marriage to whoever interpreted this. So it would be a very substantial prize for whoever interpreted this dream. Now, as you go back up and kind of work backwards, why is he demanding that they give both the interpretation and the dream itself? There's different theories on that, and I know several of you have actually asked me about this since last week. Some people say, well, he forgot the dream, and therefore he doesn't remember it. So he's asking, he just knows that whatever it was, it really bothered him. So he wants to know both the dream and the interpretation. That's one way some people look at it. The other is he remembers the dream, but he wants to make sure that they don't make up an interpretation, that he wants an accurate interpretation of the dream. Therefore, he demands that they tell him both the dream and the interpretation. Now, there's a couple reasons why he would demand it that way. One, remember these guys that do this sort of stuff, they claim that the authenticity of what they do is based on them being in contact with the gods. So if you're in contact with the gods, it's not really a hard thing for the god to tell you both the dream and the interpretation. The gods should be able to do that, okay? So if they can't do that, then he knows they're not in contact with the gods, and whatever they say is made up, okay? And so it's a way to test them. Now, some people have said maybe he's had some trouble with them in the past and they haven't told him accurate messages, and that's why he's testing them. That would be purely speculation. There's no way to know that. But, perhaps maybe there's a little bit of history there with him and these different types of guys and how well they've been doing with their job. Anyway, obviously what he's asking is very difficult, but if you truly are in contact with the gods, this is something you should be able to do, okay? So he's asking for both here. All right, so verse 7, it says, they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. Okay, so they are basically kind of admitting we can't do what you're asking. Now, they're going to full-blown admit this in just a second. But they're basically stalling, and he's going to call them out for stalling. So in the next verse, verse 8, the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time. Other translations say it different. In other words, he's just saying, I know you're stalling. You don't know the answer to the question, so you're just trying to buy time, either hoping that the gods will make it known to you while you're buying time, or that I will change my mind if you stall long enough, and that I'll give in and I'll tell you the dream, and then you can make up whatever interpretation you want to make up. So as you go on in that verse, it says, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you, and that decree is he's going to kill them. So it says, for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. In other words, you're going to make up stuff until either I figure out it's false or I change my mind or whatever the case. So he says, therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. So again, he's hitting on the fact that I'm not going to trust what you say unless you can tell me both the dream and the interpretation. All right, so verse 10, they're going to actually speak the truth at this point. It says, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So if you look at that very last part there, they're admitting that the only person who can do what you're asking to do are the gods themselves. There isn't a human alive that can tell you what you're asking to be made known. Now, he knows that too, but he's expecting them to be in contact with the gods. That's what they claim they do. That's their job. But what are they saying? They're admitting they're not in contact with the gods. Okay, that is the problem. They have finally admitted that we are running a sham here. We're not in contact with the gods, and there isn't a guy alive who can tell you what you're asking. So they're finally admitting the truth here. Probably not really what he wants to hear when he's basing a lot of his administrative decisions on what these guys tell him. So I'm sure he's probably not happy with this. But they finally speak the truth. Okay, so verse 12, you can see kind of his response. So it says, "For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them." Now, a couple things. The New King James translation says that they have already started the killing of the wise men. Most of the other translations don't say that. It says the decree has gone out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have actually started killing anybody yet. And that's probably the better interpretation. So he gives the order to start the executions, but they haven't actually executed anybody at this point. But what we also see in this verse is that Daniel and his 3 friends are lumped into this group. Okay, they're going to be killed as well. So if you're, and I may forget to do this as we go through, but kind of place yourself into Daniel's frame of mind. If you're Daniel or the other 3, what would you do in this situation? You're probably only 18 years old. You're in a foreign country. You've just graduated school. You're serving in Nebuchadnezzar's administration. He's the most ruthless guy in all the world. He's just given an order to have you executed. What in the world would you do? And notice what Daniel's about to do, and would you have the courage to do this? As for me, when I was an 18-year-old, it would probably be a hard no. I don't think I would have had this amount of courage. So as we look at what he does, verse 14, it says, "Then with counsel and wisdom," so he answers Arioch, the captain of the king's guard. That translation is not the greatest. Arioch is who he is. He is the chief executioner, okay? He is the dude that lops your head off, or at least he's in charge of all the dudes that lop your head off, okay? So this is the guy who's coming to kill you, to round you up, to have you killed, is who this guy is. All right, so Daniel's going to approach this guy, but notice how it says he approaches him. It says with counsel and wisdom. So he's going to be very tactful, very respectful in how he approaches this situation. So verse 15, it says, "He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, 'Why is the decree from the king so urgent?'" And urgent's not great either. It probably should say severe. So in other words, why did he issue such a severe decree? Meaning, okay, I understand he's upset and so forth, but why would you kill off all of your astrologers and so forth from your whole administration? Why would you wipe them all out for one single event like this? Because if you wipe them all out, then you don't have any, at least not till the next batch graduates from school. So he's asking why would he act so severely in this case? And so then it says, "Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel." Okay, so one thing to kind of notice as we're going through this, notice that, and of course, Daniel is the one presumably writing all this. Notice that he's using their Hebrew names, not their Babylonian names, okay? And if you remember what those names mean, they all have the name either God or Yahweh in the name. And so that kind of is significant to keep in the background. He's not using their Babylonian names with the fake Babylonian gods in the names. He's using the Hebrew names with Yahweh and God in the name, okay? So in this chapter, kind of notice that as we go through. All right, so verse 16. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Now, if you're Daniel, and like I said, you're about 18, you're in this foreign country, he's the most ruthless guy in the world, would you just wander in and say, hey, let me set up an appointment to tell you the interpretation before you even know the interpretation? I mean, he hasn't even asked God to tell him the interpretation yet. He's just confident God's going to do it. And so that takes a lot of courage too. So he's displaying a lot of courage here in what he's doing. All right, so verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to, notice it's the Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret. Now, it's significant that he uses the phrase God of heaven here. So if you're the God of heaven, that means you're the God over all the celestial bodies, right? Who are the Babylonian astrologers, fortune tellers, all that? What are they appealing to try to interpret the dreams? The stars and the fake gods, but a lot of it has to do with astrology. And what he's hinting at here is their astrology and their fake gods and their interpretation of the heavens could not reveal to them the dream because it's fake. Only the God of heaven, who is above all that, can actually make the interpretation known. And so it's kind of his way of saying there's only one real God, and what they're doing is false. All right, so it says, verse 18, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So what Daniel is doing is he's calling his three friends together to what we might refer to as sort of like a prayer session, that they're going to pray to God collectively, that God will give the answer to them about what is going on, okay, or what the dream is. Again, that shows a lot of courage. It also shows a lot of maturity. If you think back to when you were 18, would this be your first response to how to handle the situation? Would you have said, hey, let me get my three friends together and we'll sit around and pray about this all night long? That's not what most of us do when we're 18. Unfortunately, I mean, I wish we could all say that, and maybe some of us could, but that's probably not what a lot of us, our first thought was when we were 18. So again, this just shows a lot of courage, a lot of maturity on his part. All right, verse 19. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Could have been a dream, could have been awake. Some commentators said he probably was awake because they probably were so stressed out that they wouldn't fall asleep until God did reveal this to them. Maybe. It could be a vision while he's awake that he received this. So it says, so Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So now we're going to see like a little prayer that Daniel issues for God. So it says, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. So in other words, you notice that the Babylonians just said, all this stuff that you're asking us to do, talking to Nebuchadnezzar, there isn't a guy alive who can do what you're asking. And the first thing Daniel starts off with the prayer is, God is the one who has all the wisdom and the understanding, and he's the one who can make this kind of information known to man. So verse 21, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. In other words, he's the one in control of everything. And I'll say a little bit more about that later if I remember. And it says, he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. In other words, God is the one who will give wisdom to who he chooses to give it to and knowledge to who he chooses to give it to. And in this case, he's choosing to give it to Daniel and his 3 friends. And then it says, he reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells within him. Which, in other words, he's revealing this specific thing to Daniel that nobody else knows. Only the king would know the dream, obviously not the interpretation. So God is revealing this secret thing to him. And then verse 23, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. So this is all a prayer of thanks. So anytime God does something for us, especially if he answers a prayer directly that we've made, we should remember to thank him for it, and that's what Daniel's doing. Notice he calls him the God of my fathers. This is Daniel recalling where he's from and the one true God that reigns over Judah, but also reigns even outside of Judah in Babylon. It says, you have given me wisdom and might and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. So this is just a short prayer of thanksgiving that God has made known to Daniel and his friends what they had asked of God to do. And in the process, God is sparing their life, because if he had not responded, they were going to get killed. Okay, so verse 24, it says, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. So that kind of hints at there that the assassinations had not yet started. And so he tells him, don't start. Let me go talk to the king first. So an important thing to kind of see here is Daniel isn't just concerned about himself. Like, he's trying to save these other guys in the process. He's concerned about their well-being as well, even though they're not, a lot of them are probably Babylonian, but some of them may be from Aram, they might be from Egypt, might even be from Judah, but they have not really been faithful to God. And so he's not concerned only about himself and his 3 friends who are actually Yahweh worshipers still. He's concerned about all of them. And that's another kind of lesson for us to take away from it. All right, so verse 25, then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. A couple things here. First of all, you notice Arioch's trying to take some credit here, right? Why would he want to take some credit? Because you're going to get a reward, right? I mean, he might score one of the king's daughters, at least a promotion out of this thing. And the other reason is he's taking risk here. Because what happens if he takes in a dud and this guy does not give the proper interpretation? He's getting killed too, okay? So if you're going to take that level of risk, you want some reward on the other side, right? So I think we would probably all do the same if we're in his spot. If you're willing to risk your life on a hunch that Daniel's right, you probably want a little bit of gain on the other side. And so that's what he's doing. Now, the other slightly embarrassing thing here is he's having to admit that the guy that says he can interpret the dream is not a Babylonian, nor is he one of the experienced Babylonian astrologers. This is one of the young captives they got out of Judah, okay? The first thing that kind of tells you right off the bat is our gods couldn't get this job done. We had to find a guy who worshiped some other god to get this accomplished. And so that is a bit embarrassing on the surface for probably Arioch and for the king. But the king's willing to give it a shot because he is worried about the dream. All right, so verse 26, it said, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, The wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. What he's doing here is he's basically setting the king up for politely saying to him, your gods are fake. There's only one real God, and it's not yours. And so he's starting it off by basically telling him now, if you're 18 years old and you have a hit out on your head by the most ruthless guy in all the world, is that how you want to start the conversation? Probably not, unless you're, one, very confident in what God has told you, and two, you're confident in your God, okay? Which Daniel is obviously both. So it's a little bit of an insult, but he's doing it for a reason, and that is to proclaim the greatness of God to the Babylonians, okay? It's not intended directly to just be an insult. It's intended to elevate God to his rightful place, is what he's trying to do, okay? So verse 28, it says, but there is a God in heaven. Again, he uses the phrase God in heaven. So, your fake gods and your astrologers who appeal to interpreting the stars to give you answers, that's all, worthless. There is a God above all that, and only that God that's the only real God, one, and he is the only person who can tell the interpretation of the dream. All right, so verse 28, it says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. So what he's going to do initially is he's going to start off with a general kind of layout of the dream and the interpretation, and then in the next paragraph he gets actually specific about it. So in this initial part, it's just sort of generic. So let's see. It says in the middle of 28, your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So Daniel's saying a couple things here. The latter part, what he's saying is there's really not anything special about me as opposed to the other guys that couldn't get this job done. The only thing special is that God revealed it to me. So the special thing is God, not me, okay? And that's what he's trying to convey. And so he's trying to elevate God to God's rightful place. He's putting the fake gods in their rightful place, which is they're not real. And he's not really taking credit for this interpretation. He's just saying, I'm just basically a tool that God is using to convey this message to you. Now, if you go back to the dream itself and why Nebuchadnezzar got so freaked out about the dream, there's a couple ways to look at it. It could mean, assuming he remembers the dream, which that is the approach I'm going to take with it, then there's a couple different ways to look at the dream and why he would be so bothered by it. So again, you have to remember, the way they thought about things is gods would communicate to people through dreams. And they often would communicate to the king specifically about something. So when you read the paragraph we just read, what it says is the king is laying on his bed before he falls asleep, and he's thinking about future things, okay? So what is he thinking about? He's probably thinking about his kingdom, what's going to happen in the future with his kingdom, and so forth. And remember, he's very early in his reign. This is year 2 in the way that they count years, okay? Now, more specifically, what is he fearful of, or what is he thinking about, and how does he maybe interpret the dream himself? It's probably one of two ways. One, he could just be worried that he's going to lose the kingdom in some way, either by war or whatever the case. Or more specifically, he might be worried that there's some kind of coup being developed and somebody's going to try to assassinate him. And when you read the dream itself, you could see how he might interpret it either of those two ways if he was trying to think it through himself. But he's clearly worried about the dream and how it relates to him being king and the future direction of the kingdom. And he just doesn't know how to interpret the dream to make sense of it. And there's some reasons for that, which we'll get into as we get into the dream itself. All right, does anybody have any questions at this point? I know I'm going a little bit fast, but trying to cover as much ground as possible. Okay, so verse 31, it says, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The king's head was of fine gold." Sorry, the image's head was of fine gold. "Its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Okay, so that's the dream part of it, and he's going to tell you the interpretation here in a second. So just based on the dream itself, without reading the interpretation, you can see how Nebuchadnezzar might have a lot of questions. One, is he the statue, the whole statue? Is that him? And that may be the way he's thinking about it initially. Or is the statue, so like if he's worried about a coup, for instance, he sees the statue get destroyed. Is he thinking, I'm the statue and I'm going to get killed? Is that what this means? Or is he worried about his kingdom and he thinks the statue maybe represents Babylon in some way and he's worried about the kingdom being destroyed? The other caveat to this is the part about the stone. And so if you notice, there's a stone that's not cut with hands, which tells you it's made from a supernatural power. And that after the stone destroys the statue, the stone becomes a mountain that inhabits the entire earth. In Babylonian, their gods, their main god, which I haven't really talked about, is a guy named Marduk. And Marduk was thought to live in the mountains. So when you think about it that way, he's thinking in his mind that Marduk has crafted a boulder of some sort, has thrown it at this statue and destroyed the statue, and then Marduk's power has increased and his mountain has gotten bigger. Okay? So if you look at it that way, he may be afraid that he has somehow angered his chief god. And that is why the god may allow him to be killed or the kingdom being taken from him in some way. Which then it makes a little bit more sense. If he's worried that the gods are mad at him, then that explains why he wants the people to interpret both the dream and its interpretation. Because if they can't, then that means they're not in contact with the gods. And if they're not in contact with the gods, then they can't give him an accurate interpretation of what's going on, okay? And so that gives a little more context to what's happening. All right, so now we're going to jump into the interpretation itself, which starts in 36. It says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king." The we there, does that mean Daniel and God? Does that mean Daniel and the other three guys? Is Daniel talking about himself in third person? I don't know. It can be any of those. So verse 37, "You, O king, are a king of kings." Okay, so he's going to start off the interpretation by telling Nebuchadnezzar that God has chosen you for the role that you're in. Okay, now when he says king of kings, that's what you call a superlative. It means he is the greatest of all the kings of the earth, okay? We do that in English. I'm not going to try to think of any expressions off the top of my head. But anyway, we do the same thing. And so it just means that he's the mightiest of all the kings that are currently living. So then it goes on in verse 37, it says, "For the God of heaven has given you," again, the God of heaven. He keeps using that phrase over and over and over in this chapter. Your gods are fake. The stars in the sky and the moon and the sun and the planets and all this stuff that your astrologers look up at and try to make decisions based off how they move and all this stuff, it's all bogus. There's a God above all that, and he's the only one real God. And that one real God, he is the one who's given you this kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Now let me just stop there for a second. I know at times we don't particularly like our leaders either, okay? Whether you don't like this administration or the one before, or the one before, or the one before, I'm not going to get into all that. But anyway, God is the one who puts people in the positions they're in, okay? Now, if there's a dud in office, by your estimation, they may be there for some reason that's not apparently obvious to us, but they're in the role they're in for whatever reason. And so as you look at Nebuchadnezzar, you might ask yourself, why on earth would God put a madman who kills so many people in charge of the greatest country at that time? And I don't know the answer to that question, but there was a reason why. I don't know why, but God had a reason for it. And so verse 37 is basically saying that God is the one who's given you this, he's put you in this position. Verse 38, "And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over all of them. You are this head of gold." Okay, so Daniel does tell you right off the bat who the first part of the statue is. And the first part of the statue, the gold head, it's Babylon, but Babylon is at that time represented by Nebuchadnezzar since he's king, okay? But it's Babylon as a whole. He's not going to specifically define who the next three parts are, but through history you know who they are. But that one he does specifically tell you who it is. All right, so verse 39, "But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours." So he's telling him, one, what is he telling him? Well, one, he's saying that you're not in jeopardy of losing your kingdom, okay? Sometime after you, your kingdom is going to fall to another kingdom, but you're probably not going to be the one alive when that happens, okay? All right, so who is kingdom 2, which is represented by the silver chest and arms? That's the Medo-Persians. So Babylon was around a relatively short time, 605 to 533, I think. So about 70 years. And after them are the Medo-Persian Empire. And that one is going to be around from, 539 to 331. So they're going to be the main kingdom for a little over 200 years, okay? Let's see. And in verse 39 it says, "So, but after you will arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." Okay, so as you come down, what he's doing, we probably won't get through all this, what you'll notice is each successive kingdom is made of less valuable material than the one before it, okay? So you go from gold to silver to bronze to iron and clay mixture. So what is it that makes the one inferior to the other? It doesn't have anything to do with land mass. So Medo-Persians were bigger than Babylon, Greece was bigger than that, and then Rome was bigger even than that. So that's not what it is. Some people say that maybe they're inferior in that with each successive kingdom, the people and their influence on the world around them became more and more immoral over time, which is usually how God looks at things, right? God doesn't really care so much about the land mass and all that stuff. He cares about the spiritual quality of a kingdom. And so when we kind of step back and we look at our country or other countries, that's also how we should assess the greatness of that country, okay? And when you look at our country today compared to 50 years ago, are we better, worse, the same? And I think we all know the answer to that. And how it's our influence on the rest of the world, is that also better, worse, or the same today as it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and so forth. And so as you're looking at these kingdoms and thinking about these kingdoms, kind of think about our own country and its influence in the world, and be honest with ourselves. How would God characterize our kingdom that we live in? So you got 4 successive kingdoms. First kingdom is Babylon, second kingdom is the Medo-Persians. Third kingdom is going to be Greece. So Alexander the Great is going to come in and take over all of the Medo-Persian Empire with the addition of some additional territory as well, Egypt, so forth. And so that one will be the third kingdom, which are the silver kind of abdomen and thigh area. And then the fourth kingdom is going to be the Roman kingdom, which will come in, take out the Greek kingdom, and then expand upon that as well. And so each successive kingdom is less valuable in terms of the metals used to make up the statue, but they each have their strengths and weaknesses as terms of an earthly kingdom as you think about them. So again, Babylon is 605 to 539, Medo-Persian 539 to 331, Greece 331 to 146, and then Rome is 146 to, depends on where you want to call the end date, so it's 146 BC. The western part of the empire kind of crumbled in 395 AD. The eastern part, which we would then call the Byzantine Empire, that's going to crumble in about 1453 AD. So the Roman Empire of all these is going to be by far the longest lasting one, but it's going to split into two empires over time, and there's also additional complications which we won't really get into that really doesn't have anything to do with this. So that's what the statue is about. So it's about these 4 successive kingdoms that are going to, earthly kingdoms, that are going to come into play over time. All right, so let me find my spot here. All right, verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. So it's the strongest of the 4 in terms of a metal. And then it says, inasmuch as iron, notice the words it's going to use for the fourth kingdom, and I know that was the bell, so I'll end it here in just a second. It breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So notice the verbs here. Breaks, shatters, crushes, breaks, crush. So out of all these 4 kingdoms, the last kingdom is the strongest from like a military perspective and just looking at the kingdom and asking yourself which one is the strongest. It's the strongest kingdom, but it's going to have inherent problems in it, which we'll get into next week, which the statue is going to imply based on the mixture of the clay and the iron together. We'll stop there for tonight. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. I hope everybody has a good week.